Peace. Welcome to The Breakdown. I'm your host, Clarity. Now, zodiac signs, they're everywhere, right? In movies, TV, online, and even walking down the street. Some people represent hard for theirs. Shout out to Libras, I got my scale. Whether it's with jewelry, tattoos, whatever else they could think of, really. Now, some of these people take it really personally, too, if you guess the wrong sign. I ain't no damn Sagittarius. Do I look like a Capricorn to you? Yeah. But with all that being said, what exactly is Greek astrology anyway? And what are these signs really based on? And what are the African origins of this idea? You know we're gonna get into that and more right now on The Breakdown.
The Breakdown.
Tell me what's your sign.
It's a question almost everyone is asked at one point or another. And most of us know the answer. But what exactly are zodiac signs? Why do we have them? And what are the African origins of these ideas?
Astrology is nothing but a Greek word that means knowledge of the stars. Astrologos means knowledge of the stars. Ancient African people were the first people to observe the heavens and to chronicle their observations. What we find when we study the history of ancient Africans in the Nile Valley is that that was the epicenter of culture, science, technology, and civilization.
At the heart of this epicenter was a peaceful, affluent, and deeply spiritual society that valued high-level scientific thinking. They studied everything in the environment, on planet Earth and beyond.
Prior to the advent of electricity, when the sun went down, people went to sleep. During the day, the sun was the primary principle which guided people's lives, so the sun became associated with God or the Creator. And then once people were no longer working, were no longer hunting, were no longer building shelter, they had time to sit back and just stare up at the sky, stare up at the stars. And they began to notice some particular patterns as they observed the heavens. They noticed that the stars followed the same movement as the sun, moving from east to west. They saw the moon, and they noticed that the moon's cycle was similar to the woman's cycle. And they began to see patterns in life, patterns in the heavens and patterns on earth. And so they were able then to define time. They divided the day into 24 hours. They divided the year into 365 and a quarter days.
They also accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth. In the ancient world, Kemet was the primary source of both scientific knowledge and spiritual enlightenment.
Ancient Kemet was the place to be, and anyone who had the resources sought to come to Kemet from any corner of the world.
Modern astrology is mostly based on the writings of the 2nd century Greek scientist Claudius Ptolemy. His 4-volume work, the Tetrabiblos, represented everything the ancient Greeks knew about astrology, and ancient Greece was the foundation of advanced scientific and spiritual thought throughout Europe. But like his predecessors Socrates and Pythagoras, Ptolemy spent decades in Kemet studying at the feet of African scholars. Because thousands of years before the existence of Greece, Africans in the Nile Valley were the fathers and mothers of advanced scientific and spiritual ideas and practices. These African people birthed writing, mathematics, philosophy, art, medicine, architecture, and advanced sciences like biology, chemistry, and astronomy.
So the Greeks came, the Romans came, the Hebrews came, and many of these groups came without knowledge of science, philosophy, or religion, but based on their interactions with the indigenous African scientists and priests and priestesses, they then left the Nile Valley with a foundation upon which they could create their way through the world.
Most visitors to Kemet were humble, students grateful to be taught by the masters and return to their homelands to share what they had learned. But others, like the Greek general Alexander of Macedon, were not satisfied with merely receiving knowledge from Kemet. Instead, they wanted to control the entire African civilization. So after more than 3,000 years of relative peace and prosperity, Kemet was invaded and overtaken by Greece. They renamed it Egypt. and thousands of years of African knowledge was taken under European control.
The Greeks became the inheritors of the science, of the architecture, of the art, of the astronomy. So when we think of astrology, when we think of people's astrological signs, that is rooted in some real science. And with the Greeks' limited understanding of the African high science, they then tried to decipher it as best they could. So this high African astronomical science became, to the Greeks, astrology. All the Greeks did was copy what they saw in Africa. The Greeks also said that all of the gods and goddesses of Greece had to return to Ethiopia once a year to renew their powers, lest they become mortal. So once you have this historical framework, you can then go back and look at the Greek gods and break them down to their African original prototypes. Astrology is to astronomy what religion is to spirituality. It is the source from which this powerful knowledge sprang, but it is interpreted differently by people who didn't have the depth of the knowledge as those who created the original source material.
Many of these African astrological concepts were incorporated into European religious practices. African spirituality and imagery was so highly revered in Greece that in many cases, even the original African names of deities were barely changed.
African personalities of Asar, Aset, and Heru were studied by the Greeks, and they became known as Osiris, they became known as Isis, they became known as Horus.
In some cases, even the African written language was taken and used directly by the Greek. For example, the zodiac symbol for Greek water-carrying god Aquarius is the exact same unchanged symbol for water as written in the ancient African language called Medinecher, or what the Greeks called hieroglyphics.
With their limited understanding, they tried as best they could to delve into the minds of these ancient Africans.
Popular motifs borrowed from ancient Kemet include images of Ma'at, a Netcher or deity who took the form of scales and governed fairness and balance. Another popular image was the Netcher Asar, often depicted as a bull. Shu and Tefnut were divine twins. Serket was a healer who could cure the sting of a scorpion and was often depicted with one on her head. The circular zodiac at the Temple of Het Heru in Dendera, Egypt, contains the Greek versions of these ideas, along with their original Kemetic inspirations, several of whom are concepts the Greeks would have encountered only in Africa. Leo the lion, for example, is a species which is not native to Greece, but is native to Africa.
On the outer part of that zodiac in the ceiling of the Temple of Het Heru, there you have the zodiac symbols that we're most familiar with. Those are the Greek, but on the outer part, you have the Kemetic Zodiac. And those are the ones that, unfortunately, many of us don't know.
And you'll see the circular zodiac, but there are 6 of the zodiacs throughout this temple, so that lets us know that it had a great connection with the early astrophysicists who were actually mapping out the stars. After all, the temple does go back to the Shemsu Heru. They laid out the whole Giza Plateau based off of their observation of the cosmos. We see the zodiac as well. See Scorpio, so see the Centaur, Sagittarius. These are the Greek signs. These are not the Kemetic signs. Because why is it Greek now? Because they usurped it.
So how does the person of African descent approach the Greek zodiac differently once they learn the Greek ideas came from African people in the first place?
We can now stand on the knowledge of our ancestors, which is what we're doing right now by reclaiming the knowledge of the Nile Valley and associating the Nile Valley with Africa. It is the oldest presence of science, history, culture, knowledge, and philosophy of any people on the planet. That is our African heritage. That is our legacy. We are connected to over 10,000 generations of African greatness. That knowledge resides in you.
Mm-hmm. People of African descent have the longest, richest history of any group of people on planet Earth. By studying our own history, we can find out many of these answers about ourselves that we've been searching for. And we can also recognize our ancestors' work when we see it. But that's it for now. I'm Clarity, and I'll see you next time on The Breakdown.